I'm Greg Giuliano. I'm an executive coach, organizational change consultant, and author. I believe leaders have the power to shape the future and change people's lives. I also believe people who challenge the status quo and go beyond usual and ordinary are rare. They're willing to go to the edge and push farther, over and over again. When I find these ultra leaders, I love to talk with them. In each episode, I talk with ultra leaders to learn how they do what they do and how they keep growing as leaders. I promise you a full dose of ultra leadership from other ultra leaders just like you in every conversation. We're at the edge of another episode. Let's jump in. Welcome to another edition of Ultra Leadership. I'm excited about today's guest and our conversation. Please welcome Sam Berman. Sam is a longtime strategy and transformation executive who most recently was Vice President of Enterprise Effectiveness at Highmark Health. He's also worked at Wells Fargo, GE Capital, Fidelity Investments, and Deloitte Consulting. Sam is a thought leader who grows and redefines, scales, globalizes, and digitizes organizations while building the next generation of leaders and remaining customer-focused. After reading this recommendation on his LinkedIn profile, I knew I wanted to talk to Sam. Three things come to mind when I think of Sam: visionary executive, challenges the status quo, and develops leaders. Sam pushes leaders to think more transformative by leveraging his previous experiences and pushing the boundaries of how technology applications can fundamentally change the way companies can operate in the future. Sam constantly challenges the status quo when recommending solutions to our business problems. That sounds like ultra leadership to me. So I am ready for this conversation. Welcome, Sam.
Glad to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So that recommendation really caught me when I first read it, and I've had it in front of me for a few days now, getting ready for our conversation today. And so I want to jump right to it. You are a change leader. You know, I think in your head that change isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. And so I'm curious of all the transformation that you've led. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned leading change?
Fortunately for me, I learned this lesson very early in my career. And through change, and the lesson that I learned is that you have to meet people where they're at. And while this might be my full-time job, and historically has been, typically those that own the change and then have to execute against it and actually operate the change, it is typically their part-time job. And therefore, you have to meet them where they are from both a pace perspective and from a degree of change perspective. So with that, breaking change into bite-sized chunks is critically important. And being a true partner through that change, such that the eventual owner of that change feels as if they have skin in the game, is paramount. It absolutely is. I've learned that to effectively change, you have to be a good storyteller, a good influencer, and you have to authentically care about what others are trying to achieve.
So much there, right? So there's a difference between announcing a change and then helping all these human beings process what that means and come along with you. It's not as easy as sending an email, that there's a lot of work. And it sounds like that it's fundamentally, you might have a roadmap for the execution of the change, but engaging the humans and helping them make their way through is the harder lift.
It is. If you look at the statistics, depending on your source, 60 to 70% of changes fail. It's not because they're not the right idea. It's not because the economics are spot on. It's because through the execution and the planning itself, because it starts early, the change fails to address the people-related risks. At the end of the day, we're all human. We're all people. This is a people-related business, no matter what it is, industry that you work in. And if you're not able to get the human buy-in and the people that are on the team with you truly feels that they're part of the solution and their voices are truly heard, that change is going to fall, whether it be at execution or shortly thereafter. That's my 2 cents.
So you mentioned that it's meeting people where they are, and you're trying to engage a whole bunch of leaders and managers who it's not their day job, but they might think of it as side of the desk stuff. But
Mhm.
you've got to get them to engage and do a little bit more. How have you helped them get in their heads that they needed to meet people where they are? And how did you teach them? Was there any techniques, or how did you get them to see that they needed to engage all their humans in a different way as they if they were going to be successful in doing the change?
Before pursuing the change, there has to be a fundamental truth, and that is that the organization is ready for the change and that there is organizational wherewithal that could absorb it. But let's assume for a moment that is true. I believe influencing is absolutely critical through the entire change process. And at the risk of oversimplifying, I think of influencing from three dimensions: one by facts and logic, one through emotion and pulling at people's heartstrings, and thirdly, through shared outcomes. Let's do this together. You can use each of those three individually or together in various permutations. And I think that in itself is absolutely critical.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep pulling this thread because I love this. Because so when people are resistant to the change, it might be that they just think it's a bad idea or they think it won't work, right? So the facts might work with them. But then there are some people who their resistance is that in their heads, they're telling a story that if we do this, something terrible will happen. Completely irrational, right? The world is going to end if we do this. So that they go there. And how do you engage those folks when we're trying to get people to change?
Well, certainly easier said than done, but always addressing the what's in it for me. One of my favorite stories is back in one of my former lives, we were going through a strategic planning process and our financial goals were pretty aggressive. And through that, we recognized that labor arbitrage was absolutely necessary. So, in simple terms, we needed to offshore some jobs. But to offshore some of those jobs, it was not just for a labor arbitrage perspective, but also to ensure that we meet customer needs that are global. There was one particular executive that was very pro-American jobs, and I applaud him for that. And he saw this as taking jobs outside of the United States. So that obviously that's very emotional.
Yeah.
Through fact, we showed this individual scenarios. What would happen if we didn't offshore jobs? What would happen if we offshored as many as we possibly could? And what would happen if we offshored some? All within reason. And through those facts, we showed the economics and the impacts and the ultimate impact to potential workforce reduction. So either way, in one case, you're offshoring jobs. In the other case, you're eliminating jobs or essentially going in the red. So those facts are very critical, but that alone was not what it took. It took that emotional piece and it took doing this together and building a partnership with that gentleman. Over time, this gentleman then became the executive sponsor for the offshoring. So not only did he embrace the change, he wanted to lead the charge. And that's how you know when you have won the hearts and minds of others.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of Mark Gouston's book, Just Listen, right? Moving people from resisting to considering to, yeah, I think I'll do that to that. And then they become leading the charge, right? Following through that persuasion cycle that he talks about. I could talk about this all day long, but I want to ask you another question because you've been leading for a long time. So this will be a two-parter. So what's the worst leadership advice that you've ever heard? And then we'll flip that. And then as you're sharing advice with younger leaders, what's the advice that you find yourself sharing the most?
There's two pieces that go in the category of worst leadership advice. One, spin the facts so that hard truth is avoided. And to me, that only avoids a conversation that ultimately needs to be had. And the later you have that conversation, the harder the conversation and the bigger the negative implications. Two, I've heard a leader once say, ask for feedback, but don't really have the intent to use it. To me, that just blows my mind away, especially when driving change. You want people to have a voice. You want them to feel that they're part of the process. Placating people as a leader is really, in my view, a road to a bad place.
Wow. So that's some of the worst advice. I'm glad you never listened to that. The first one, it's like, yeah, let's do the workaround, right? Let's avoid, right? And there's no avoiding, right? The only way is through. Man, I can't believe somebody actually said that. And then to be that inauthentic and say, yeah, listen to the feedback, but don't do anything with it. That's crazy. That's crazy. So I'm glad you didn't listen to that. So you took those lessons in and probably have done the 180. So what's the advice that you share with young leaders?
I would say lead, don't manage. Be comfortable empowering those around you. It's unbelievable what people can do when they truly have the space, and lead authentically. And when you lead authentically, you start building your own style. You'll observe different leadership styles from around you. You'll pick up on the things that you like and the things that you want to embrace as part of your own style. But in doing so, you'll also pick up the things that you don't want to have part of your style. And just recognize that leadership is not a final destination. It's a continual learning curve. Personally, I've grown from a tough leader to a tough but fair leader to a tough but fair and empathetic leader. That's my journey.
Yeah.
My journey continues. I encourage everybody to embrace the leadership journey.
I love that. So how do you keep growing as leader? Tell me about your practice. It's a daily practice, lifelong journey, as you just said. So tell me a little bit about your practice.
Read a lot, listen a lot, hire those that are diverse to complement myself on the team and others on the team. The diversity comes in thought and experience and background, and ask questions with the intent to understand. And another thing that I've done intentionally over my career is extended my professional experiences into unfamiliar territory, whether it be a functional domain, a industry, a subsector within an industry. And that allows for continual learning. And in doing so in such a way that you're able to apply your previous experiences in just different ways.
Always pushing the boundaries.
Pushing the boundaries. Pushing the status quo.
Right. Exactly. Even my own status quo, right?
That's right.
I love it. So you read a lot. What book are you recommending to people these days?
Well, that's a two-part question. What book do I recommend these days? I recommend this to all. And that's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It's a classic.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of college, there was a COO that I had an interview with, and he ended the interview with, whether we move forward or not, my one recommendation is to go ahead and read this book. And that really stuck with me. It stuck with me, A, he cared, whether or not I was going to be part of the future team or not. But B, is really a good read for people throughout their careers. It's one that requires a refresher over time. So I often suggest to, especially those early in their career, to take a read. That's a very different question to what am I reading now? What am I reading now is Master of the Matrix. We work in the matrix environment, no matter how large or small a company. Driving change and leading an organization requires some sort of management and navigation through that matrix.
Yeah. Awesome. So let me ask you this. You've led a lot of teams, and what's the behavior or practice that when you're leading a team that you think if everyone on the team exhibited this behavior, did this thing, team performance would go up?
Team before self. This is especially true at executive levels and beyond. Seek to understand and listen authentically and engage authentically as well. If you have other ideas, if you have alternative viewpoints, share those in the moment. Diversity of thought is what creates better solutions. It's what strengthens businesses. It's what strengthens teams. So let's be comfortable in sharing those diverse viewpoints. No one idea is right. There's multiple ways to get to the end game. Let's come together as a team to figure out what's the right answer for us at this time. Conversely, when one does not authentically engage or share diversity of thoughts, especially in the moment, what happens is you get a toxic environment in the background where You get a lot of questioning, why are we moving in that direction? I don't agree with that. And it really undercuts the team as a result and creates this, what I would call a very toxic environment.
There's a danger at senior levels that you get into those rooms because you know a lot, and that thinking team before self and seeking to understand, those muscles kind of start to atrophy because there's a fear of being seen as not knowing, not having the answer. And that's how you got in the room. And we stop being learners. We start to try to show up as knowers. And it's like the death knell for a strong senior leadership team.
Yeah, I've seen dynamic, well-functioning senior leadership teams that really consider themselves a team. And I've seen some dysfunctional teams where their allegiance is to their silo first and foremost, even at the detriment of the broader organization.
Yeah.
Take, for example, a sports analogy. It's like somebody that is out to score a goal in their every shift in hockey without regard whether or not they win the game.
Right.
You want to win the game at the end of the game, at the end of the day.
Right. It's about their personal stats, not whether the team wins or.
That's right.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah, so those are two great ideas. So everybody, it's always team before self, and seeking to understand is huge, right? Being curious is a superpower.
Yep.
A superpower. So you like to go to the edge and you like to push things further. I always ask the leaders that I coach who are, they're awesome, they're very successful, but they all have a habit that sometimes this is the way that they get in their own way. And so I'm curious if you would share with us, if you feel like it, how do you get in your own way sometimes?
My desire to move fast and my obsession with outcomes. I'm super aware of this. So therefore, this gets back to meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
In a conversation, in a 30-day sprint, in a initiative that's multi-year, I just have to pace myself to the audience. The last thing that I want to do is look back and everybody's behind me miles and miles. I can't do this by myself. It takes a village to make real change happen. So it's important that I pace myself. I will always be outcomes biased, but you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I like to end all my coaching conversations and all the meetings that I lead with one question. What are you most grateful for today?
You're going to ask me a tough question. So in true form, I'll give you 3 answers. My family's health, first and foremost. Without that, you really have nothing. My family, I'm blessed to be married to a wonderful woman. She's a superhuman and a superwoman. We have a wonderful, soon-to-be 10-year-old son. And thirdly, I'm extremely fortunate to be a first generation who really got the opportunity to live the American dream. And for all of that, I'm extremely grateful.
Awesome. I'm grateful for you spending some time with us today. So I'll give you the final word. Imagine you're giving your commencement address and this is your big close. Michael Keaton says, I'm Batman. What's your big close for your commencement address?
Whatsoever a man soweth, what you put into it is what you get out of it. Don't sacrifice personal relationships or your character for the sake of your professional gain.
Amen. I love it. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. I've learned things. I really appreciate the conversation. You are an ultra leader, right? You're out there going beyond usual and ordinary, leading big change, and that is evident. Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please give us a review, share with your friends, and until next time, stay in it. Keep going. Go to the edge, push farther, and repeat.
If you're enjoying Ultra Leadership, please take a minute and give us a review wherever you find your podcasts. And please stay in touch. Sign up for our Ultra Leadership newsletter at ultraleadership.com. Now, before you jump to your next meeting, I invite you to reflect on what you heard today. What stood out for you? What insight might you want to incorporate into your leadership practice? Until next time, remember, as a leader, you always have the power to shape the future and change lives. So go to the edge and push farther. Thanks for listening.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.